Hello, it's Lord Slar here, and today we return to the Reappraisal series, where I take a look at the bottom 10 Doctor Who episodes according to Doctor Who Magazine's 2014 poll, and see if they deserve their reputation as one of the worst. Today we'll be discussing Time Flight. Time Flight takes place directly after Earthshock, meaning it has to follow up one of the best 5th Doctor stories and Adric's well-written death. Is its reputation based on being a disappointing follow-up to Earthshock, or does it really deserve to be considered one of the worst Doctor Who episodes ever? Let's find out. The first major issue with the story is the handling of Adric's death. There is an almost token mention of his death at the beginning of the story, and the dialogue places it only hours after that happened, yet they seem to move on straight away, with the Doctor suggesting exciting places to go at only a minute into the episode. The Doctor even says that Adric wouldn't want them to mourn him unnecessarily. Well, yes, I'm sure that's true, but moving on instantly certainly doesn't represent that. He even says this is how Adric would have wanted it. Bollocks, would he? Why would he have wanted to die even though stopping the freighter was no longer something that was necessary? After that first scene, there is only one other mention of Adric's death, when they see a ghostly apparition of him in the Master's lair, but this comes across as stilted and insulting considering there had been no mournful attitude throughout the episode. Even Tegan has a beaming smile only 8 minutes into episode 1. Given how few long-term companions have actually died while on the TARDIS, this was an excellent opportunity to explore the effect it had on the TARDIS crew and the Doctor's attitude in particular. That opportunity is completely wasted by this episode to an insulting extent. This is quite frankly extremely poor writing, and it's as if all of the writers involved in this story had lost interest in Adric, despite having a good exit story only a story earlier. The story starts off with an interesting premise. Aeroplanes are going missing through a time contour and landing in prehistoric Earth. Once there, a mysterious figure called Khalid, who is actually the Master in disguise, is ordering people to work on some kind of project. It's great stuff and quite reminiscent of the mystery that are built up around the Faceless Ones in some ways. However, as soon as the Master, as Khalid, is first on screen, everything goes downhill. For one, the altered perception of reality, so that the characters only see modern day to where they really are, is a trick used so often it becomes utterly tedious. All of the side characters are dreadfully boring. They're all one-note, generic, and have absolutely no flair in their performances. The Master, as I mentioned, disguises himself as Khalid for the first half of the story. A natural question to ask about this is why? The answer is that there is no reason. The Doctor only sees Khalid not long before he reveals himself as the Master, and him not revealing his identity doesn't actually change anything. I mean that. When he reveals himself as the Master for the second part of the story, literally nothing changes about it. It's a reveal for the sake of a reveal. Cheap, shock value, pure and simple. But in the context of the episode, it doesn't even have shock value given that the Master appeared quite commonly in this era of Doctor Who. Again, this represents really poor writing, which can't generate genuine excitement with its own plot, therefore has to resort to cheap reveals which have absolutely no substantive impact. Another thing which does this story no favours is just how bland the Season 19 TARDIS team are. They're already a pretty undeveloped bunch to begin with, but they have no moments of fun interaction here, which is pretty much essential for a TARDIS team. Compare this story to, say, The Dominators. Both are written very poorly, but The Dominators is lots of fun because of the sheer energy of Troughton and Hines. Time Flight just doesn't have that. I can't help but feel that perhaps Adric has created a missing link here. Even though they were all an undeveloped crew earlier on in the season, there still were fun moments in stories like Kinder, The Visitation and Earthshock. In Time Flight, all the companions feel very distant from the Doctor, whereas when Adric was there, he was kind of what gelled them together because he was closer to the Doctor. I may not have been his biggest fan, but this was the function he served in the dynamic of that TARDIS crew. All in all, the TARDIS crew dynamic here is dreadful. In fact, it's probably one of the worst dynamics the show has ever had. There is very little character or entertainment value. This is improved by episodes such as Snake Dance, but here I could not care less for any of them. The main plot of this story is that the Master is trying to repair his TARDIS and harness the power of the telepathically powerful Xerathon. There is nothing interesting about it whatsoever. There's nothing awfully wrong with it like the rest of the episode, but there's nothing to it either. The last 2 episodes are almost solely focused on this aspect, and it's more or less 50 minutes of technobabble. You'll be bored to absolute tears after only the first 10 minutes of it, never mind the full 50. To conclude, Time Flight is well worthy of its reputation as one of the worst ever Doctor Who stories. It's actually far worse than I even remember. Every aspect of this story is extremely weak, and is the pinnacle of the aimlessness of the early Davison era. The show in this episode feels lacking in any identity or competency. It's not even visually interesting. Obviously I'm not going to harp on about crap effects, as that's the case for a lot of Classic Who stories, but the direction here is just very flat, whereas there is some visually interesting Classic Who stories, a lot of them in fact, including the previous story Earthshock. There is nothing stimulating or interesting about this episode, and it is awful in almost every regard. There will be no reappraisal for Time Flight.